Husband called my teenage daughter a whore because she asked to bring a boyfriend home. Husband said he didn't want to see him in his house, but this is my house. My husband, Mark 36, and I have been married for about 5 years now. I always thought he'd be a great father figure to my daughter, Emily, who's 15. She was from a previous relationship, and while I knew it wouldn't be easy blending our families, I never imagined things would get this bad. Emily doesn't live with us full-time. She stays with her dad during the week and comes to our house on weekends and school breaks. At first, Mark seemed okay with the arrangement. I know she's not perfect what teenager is. She's a little messy, loves her music a bit too loud, and has that typical teen attitude sometimes. But I never thought it was anything out of the ordinary. Mark, on the other hand, sees her as nothing but a disruption. Every time she's here, he's got something to complain about. It started small comments about how she leaves her clothes on the floor, how she's always on her phone, how she stays up too late. I figured it was just normal adjustment stuff, you know. It's not easy suddenly having a teenager in the house if you're not used to it, but then it started getting worse. Emily loves music. It's her outlet, her way of expressing herself. On weekends, she likes to play it loud and dance around her room. We agreed that she has to turn it down by 9 p.m., and she does. But even that isn't good enough for Mark. He complains that it's still too loud, that it's disrespectful to play music at all, that she's just trying to get on his nerves. I've tried to mediate, to explain to him that this is normal teenage behavior, but he doesn't want to hear it. Things really started to escalate when Emily began dating. She's 15 now, and yes, she's interested in boys. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I was a teenage girl once too, and I know what it's like. But Mark, he thinks I'm insane for allowing it. He's always on me about how I'm encouraging her to be promiscuous, how I'm setting a bad example because I had her when I was 15. He's constantly trying to make me feel like a failure of a mother, reminding me of my past like it's some terrible thing I should be ashamed of. It all came to a head last weekend. Emily asked her dad if the guy she's been seeing could come over to his house. Her dad said no, and she respected that. But when she came over to our place for the weekend, she asked me instead. I didn't see the harm in it. I know the boy, he's nice, respectful, and they've only been going out for a few weeks. Plus, I'd be home the whole time to supervise. But of course, I knew I needed to check with Mark first. I thought it would be a simple conversation, but the moment I brought it up, he exploded. He said absolutely not, that it was inappropriate and irresponsible. I could see Emily getting upset, so I tried to calm things down. I asked Mark if we could talk about it privately, away from Emily, but he wasn't having any of it. He started ranting about how I was enabling her to be a whore, how I was encouraging her to ruin her life just like I did. I was stunned. I'd never heard him speak about her like that before. I tried to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't doing anything wrong, but he just kept going. He said her dad was right to say no and that I was undermining his authority by even considering it. He accused me of trying to be her friend instead of her mother, of being more concerned with making her happy than teaching her right from wrong. Emily heard everything. She didn't say a word, just stood there, tears welling up in her eyes. I could feel my heart breaking for her. She's a good kid. She's smart, kind, and has so much potential. And here was the man who's supposed to be a father figure to her, calling her a whore. When Mark finally stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, Emily just looked at me. She didn't cry, but I could see how hurt she was. She said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." My sweet girl was apologizing for something that wasn't her fault, and I felt like the worst mother in the world. I hugged her and told her that it wasn't her fault, that she didn't do anything wrong. I tried to reassure her, but I could see the damage was done. She spent the rest of the weekend in her room, barely speaking, barely eating. She even stopped playing her music, which broke my heart even more. When Mark finally calmed down, I tried to talk to him about what happened. I told him how hurtful his words were, how wrong it was to speak to her like that, but he just doubled down. He said he was only telling the truth, that someone needed to set her straight before she made a mistake she'd regret for the rest of her life. I don't know what to do anymore. I love my husband, but I can't stand the way he treats my daughter. It feels like I'm stuck between them, constantly having to choose sides. And the worst part is, I don't know how to fix it. Emily doesn't deserve this. She deserves to feel safe and loved in her own home, but I can't give her that as long as Mark is here. After Mark left for his business trip, the tension in the house finally eased a little. It was a relief to have a few days without the constant friction, and I could see the change in Emily too. She seemed lighter, more relaxed, and I knew she needed this break as much as I did. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, Emily turned to me with a question that I had half expected. "Mom, would it be okay if Jake came over while Mark's away?" I paused for a moment, considering her request. I knew how much she liked Jake, and I also knew that things had been difficult for her lately. Part of me wanted to say no, to avoid any potential complications, but another part of me understood how important this was for her. I nodded, giving her a small smile. "Sure, honey. Just remember the house rules, okay?" Emily's face lit up with excitement. "Of course, Mom. I promise we'll just hang out and watch movies." When Jake arrived, the atmosphere in the house was comfortable. They spent the evening laughing and talking, and I could tell that Emily was happy. It was nice to see her like that after everything that had happened. As the night wore on, Emily asked if Jake could stay a bit longer. I hesitated, but she quickly reassured me that they would just stay in the living room and keep things low-key. I agreed, wanting to give her some space to enjoy her time with him. Later that night, I went to bed, leaving them to their movie marathon. As I lay there, I couldn't help but worrying about whether I had made the right decision. It's tough as a parent to strike the right balance between trust and caution. The next morning, I woke up early and headed to the kitchen to make breakfast. Emily joined me shortly after, looking a bit tired but content. We sat down together, and I decided to have a gentle conversation with her. "Emily, did you and Jake have a good time last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded, smiling a little. "Yeah, we did. Thanks for letting him stay, Mom. I really appreciate it." I hesitated for a moment, then decided to ask what had been on my mind. "Emily, I just want to make sure you're being responsible, okay? If there's anything you need to talk about, I'm here." She looked at me, understanding what I was trying to say. "Mom, don't worry. We're being careful, I promise." Her words reassured me, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of my responsibilities as a mother. I wanted to trust her, but I also wanted to make sure she was making smart choices. "I'm glad to hear that, sweetie," I said softly. "Just remember, I'm always here for you if you need anything." We finished our breakfast, and as the day went on, I felt a bit more at ease. I knew that Mark would be back soon, and I wasn't sure how things would go when he returned. But for now, I was focused on supporting Emily and making sure she felt safe and loved in our home. After Mark left for his business trip, Emily seemed to blossom in the newfound peace of the house. The tension that had been hanging over us for so long lifted, and it felt like we could finally breathe again. Emily was back to her usual self, smiling, laughing, and even playing her music again. It was like a part of her that had been stifled was finally free. Jake started coming over more often. I had to admit, it was nice seeing them together. They were sweet and respectful, and it warmed my heart to see how happy he made her. It was a far cry from the atmosphere when Mark was around, where every little thing Emily did seemed to spark an argument. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch, when Emily and Jake came in and sat down at the table. I could tell they had been out for a walk because their cheeks were flushed, and they were both a little out of breath. Emily looked radiant, happier than I'd seen her in a long time, and Jake had that easygoing smile on his face that always put me at ease. We started chatting about all sorts of things: school, the latest movies they wanted to see, and even a funny story about something that had happened to one of their friends. It was so normal, so peaceful. I didn't even realize how much I had missed this simple, easy conversation in my home. Suddenly, I heard the front door creak open. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first thought was that maybe Mark had forgotten something. But when I turned around, I saw him standing there in the doorway, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and a surprised smile on his face. "Mark," I said, my voice betraying my shock. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." He grinned, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I wanted to surprise you," he said, holding out the flowers. "Thought I'd come back a day early and make it a nice weekend together." I was stunned, trying to process this sudden change of plans. I took the flowers from him, my hands trembling slightly as I thanked him, but my mind was racing. I wasn't prepared for him to be home so soon, and I could feel the tension starting to creep back into the room. Before I could say anything else, Mark walked past me, heading toward the kitchen. My heart sank as I realized what he was about to see. I quickly followed him, trying to think of how to handle the situation. When we walked into the kitchen, Emily and Jake were still sitting at the table, mid-laugh about something. But the moment they saw Mark, the laughter died on their lips. Emily's face went pale, and Jake immediately stiffened, his smile fading into an awkward, nervous expression. Mark stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. For a moment, there was complete silence. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel my stomach knotting up as I waited for Mark's reaction. "What's going on here?" Mark finally asked, his voice low and controlled, but with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. Emily swallowed hard, glancing at me for reassurance before she spoke. "Dad, this is Jake. We were just hanging out." "Hanging out," Mark repeated, his gaze shifting from Emily to Jake and then back again. "In my house, while I'm not here." I could see the anger building in his eyes, and I knew I had to step in before things escalated. I placed a hand on his arm, trying to calm him down. "Mark, it's okay. I knew Jake was coming over. They were just keeping me company while you were away." But Mark wasn't having it. He pulled his arm away from me, his focus entirely on Emily now. "I don't care what you were doing," he snapped, his voice rising. "I come home to find you sitting in my kitchen with some boy, like it's no big deal. Where's the respect, Emily?" Emily looked down at the table, her hands clasped tightly together. "Dad, it's not like that. We weren't doing anything wrong." Mark let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "You weren't doing anything wrong. In my house, with some boy behind my back, and you think that's okay?" Jake, who had been sitting silently, finally spoke up. "Sir, I promise we were just talking. I would never disrespect you or your home." Mark turned his glare on Jake, and I could see the boy flinch slightly under his gaze. "You shouldn't even be here," Mark said coldly. "You have no business being in my house when I'm not here." I stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Mark, please, they're just kids. They weren't doing anything wrong. You're overreacting." But Mark wasn't listening. His anger was like a storm, building and swirling until it was impossible to reach him. "Overreacting? I come home early, to surprise my wife, and this is what I find. You think this is acceptable?" I didn't know what to say. I could see the fear in Emily's eyes, the way she was shrinking back into her chair, trying to make herself small. I hated seeing her like that, especially after the progress we'd made while Mark was gone. "Jake, I think it's time for you to leave," Mark said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Jake looked at Emily, clearly unsure of what to do. She nodded slightly, her eyes filled with apology, and he slowly stood up. "I'm sorry, sir," he said quietly, before turning to leave. As soon as Jake was out the door, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Mark stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, and I could see the battle raging in his mind. Emily was staring down at the table, her face pale and her hands trembling. I felt like I was standing on a tightrope, trying to balance my love for my husband with my need to protect my daughter. But as I looked at Emily, so small and fragile in that moment, I knew I had to stand up for her. "Mark," I said softly, stepping in front of him, "we need to talk." His eyes flashed with anger, but he nodded. "Yeah, we do." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Mark's anger was palpable, and I knew that whatever came next would change things between us, possibly for good. But I also knew that I couldn't let this continue, not when it was tearing my daughter apart. Mark, I began, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage, you're blowing this out of proportion. Emily and Jake weren't doing anything wrong. They were right here in the kitchen the whole time, under my supervision. Mark's jaw tightened, and I could see the muscles in his neck strain as he fought to keep his temper in check. Supervision, he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You call this supervision? Letting some boy come over while I'm not here, letting them do whatever they want. That's not supervision, that's negligence. His words stung, but I refused to back down. They weren't doing whatever they wanted, Mark. They were just sitting here, talking. They're teenagers, they're going to want to spend time together. And as long as they're being responsible, I don't see the harm. The harm? Mark's voice rose, the anger he'd been holding back now spilling over. The harm is that you're encouraging this behavior, letting her think it's okay to sneak around behind my back. What kind of example are you setting for her? Emily flinched at his words, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. My heart ached for her, but I knew I had to stay strong. Mark, this isn't about setting an example, it's about trust. I trust Emily to make good decisions, and I trust her to be honest with me. That's why she asked if Jake could come over instead of sneaking around. She didn't do anything behind your back. But you didn't tell me, Mark shot back, his voice full of accusation. You didn't think it was important enough to discuss with me, the person who's supposed to be her stepfather, the person who has just as much right to say what goes on in this house as you do. I felt my temper flare at that. Mark, this isn't about rights. This is about respect. I've always respected your opinions, even when I didn't agree with them. But you don't get to dictate everything, especially when it comes to my daughter. Mark's eyes blazed with fury. Your daughter, what about me? Am I just supposed to stand by and let you make all the decisions? This is my home too. And there it was, the line he'd crossed that made something inside me snap. Your home, I echoed, my voice suddenly cold and sharp. Mark, let's get one thing straight. This is my house. I pay the bills, I make the rules, and I decide what's best for my daughter. If you can't respect that, then maybe you should rethink where you stand in this relationship. Mark looked taken aback, his anger faltering for the first time. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening again. You can't just throw me out of our life because I disagree with you. I'm her stepfather, I have a right to be involved in her life. You're not acting like a stepfather, I shot back. You're acting like a tyrant, trying to control everything just because it doesn't fit into your idea of what's right. But this isn't about you, Mark. It's about what's best for Emily. And right now, what's best for her is not having you constantly belittling her, making her feel like she's doing something wrong just by being herself. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with all the things we weren't saying. I could see the conflict in Mark's eyes, the realization that maybe, just maybe, he'd gone too far this time. But instead of backing down, he doubled down, his pride refusing to let him admit he was wrong. So that's it, then, he said, his voice quiet but laced with bitterness. You're choosing her over me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke. I'm not choosing one over the other, Mark. I'm choosing what's right. And right now, what's right is protecting my daughter from this toxic environment you've created. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. No, Mark, this has gone on long enough. I won't let you continue to hurt her with your words and your actions. If you can't find a way to be supportive and understanding, then maybe it's time for you to leave. He stared at me, stunned into silence. I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to find a way to salvage this, but I knew the damage was done. There was no going back from what had been said. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark nodded stiffly. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. If that's how you feel, I'll go. But don't think for a second that this is over. We're going to have a serious conversation about where this marriage is heading. He turned on his heel and stalked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding in my chest. I heard him go upstairs, the sound of drawers being opened and closed as he packed his things. A few minutes later, he came back down, a suitcase in hand. He didn't say anything as he walked past me, heading for the door. Just before he left, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice low and filled with warning. "Maybe," I replied quietly, "but it's a mistake I'm willing to make if it means protecting my daughter." With that, he opened the door and walked out, leaving the house eerily quiet in his wake. I stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out in front of me. I turned back to the kitchen, where Emily was still sitting, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of what this meant for us. But as I walked over and sat down beside her, pulling her into a comforting embrace, I knew I had done the right thing. No matter what happened next, I had stood up for my daughter. And that was something I would never regret.